You're listening to From Fear to Love. I'm your host, Alma Lee. I am a white woman who was born and raised in rural Alabama. And I think that in and of itself gives a credence to the gravity of what I'm about to speak upon, which is racism. So, what the hell can a white therapist living in the South tell you and teach you about racism? Well, all I can do is share with you my own personal narrative about it and my own take on it, my perspective. So one thing I can say without hesitation is that my entire life, I have never once understood racism as far as why people felt compelled to be racist. And specifically, I'm talking about white people being racist towards black people. I never understood it. I can remember being a child and not understanding it. Now, that's not me trying to sort of say, well, I've never been, I don't see color. I've never been a racist. Or no, I can tell you where my heart has always been. I've never felt like I was better. Never in my life have I ever considered myself better than black people, ever. It's never once crossed my mind. Now, that being said, I've tripped up and I've made mistakes, and I have, because of my, background and where I grew up, I hurt people and said things and did things that towards my fellow black friends and just strangers, I'm sure. Just, I've probably acted in fearful ways because of the way that I was raised. Now, what's the purpose of me creating this episode today? Well, I want to create safety in being honest and open and authentic, because I think a lot of white people feel the way that I do, but maybe they have trouble expressing themselves because, for many years, I had a lot of shame attached to my previous behaviors, especially behaviors that I engaged upon as a child because I didn't know any better. I think a lot of people avoid having the conversation because they do have those preconceived ideals. I believe that from a cultural standpoint, and I'm speaking about white people, I think that it's something that is inherently taught and it's kind of cast upon generation after generation. And I think people lean into that as a measure of connection with their families. In other words, in white groups, if you don't adhere to sort of the hive mind, if you will, then you get cast out. You're not welcome here if you don't believe the way we believe. I've seen that mindset time and time again, and not just in a racism mindset, but in church, in politics, in any type of collective mindset where you have a group of white people, and I'm sure it's true with other cultures as well, but I'm talking about my exposure to people of, that look like me. If you do not adhere to that hive mind, then you're out. So I do think a lot of people lean into racism for that reason because, mama and papa and aunts and uncles and cousins and whatnot, if you even so much as remotely express any empathy or compassion for any party outside of your clan or your tribe, then you're not welcome here because you think differently. So it's really a sad state of affairs when people have to choose to lean into hatred as opposed to, standing up for their own personal values and taking the risk of being cast aside. So number one, I think that is a big reason why a lot of people lean into racism just as a knee-jerk response. Now, that doesn't excuse it by any stretch of the imagination. I think we all are accountable for our behavior. I think we all should hold space for our own values. The thing that I'm very grateful for is I wasn't really groomed to believe anything. I wasn't made to go to church. I wasn't made to lean into any political ideals. Hell, my parents didn't even really, they cared that I went to school because that meant I was out of the house. And they really didn't give a shit about my grades because, what point is that? So there wasn't a whole lot of grooming. So while I didn't have a whole lot of encouragement, I also didn't have a whole lot of discouragement. And because of that, I was given the freedom, unintentionally, of course, but I was given the freedom to think for myself. I think that experience alone is probably the fundamental reason why I am a critical thinker and why I do lean into my own ideals, because I've always had to. That being said, I never had hatred or never felt disgust. Far from it. I was intrigued. I can remember my earliest memory of Black people and my consideration of who they were and what they were like was, I was curious about their hair. I wanted to know what their hair felt like. I can remember being like maybe in first grade and being in town and seeing a lady and her children at the store. And the lady had the most beautiful afro. That is something, too, that I will say, is that I think an afro, man, that is the most confident, beautiful hairstyle there is. And I'm not blowing smoke. I genuinely believe that. I've said that numerous times, but we'll get into that later. But I just remember being curious, talking more about the ideals and the grooming and the culture. Well, because of my background, because my childhood was so tumultuous and, my grandparents were my safe place. They were my safe place. Going to my grandparents' farm was I have so many beautiful, wonderful, peaceful, safe memories there. My grandparents were hardworking Christians and they never missed church. They went as often as possible and they took us too to Vacation Bible School. And so in my mind, my grandmother would get upset, my mama, she would get upset with me if I said dang or darn, because in her mind that was too close to damn. So based upon that, my idea of who and what my grandparents were was that they were the epitome of what it meant to be a quote unquote good person. So keep that in mind, right? And there was no profanity. There was prayer. There was, ritual. There was Christian beliefs. There were, they were just hardworking people. So as a child, when you take me, this white kid, out of an abusive home, and then I have these intermittent interactions with my grandparents where I was presented with routine, I was presented with loving discipline, I was presented with care, concern, and my grandmother curling my hair with those pink foam rollers and praying with me and just taking time with me to love me. And my grandfather, had it not been for him, I would have never known what, a loving man could be like, because my father certainly wasn't one. So take that part into consideration, right? My grandparents, in my mind, were good people. But, they did not believe that white people and Black people should coexist. They did not believe that they never went out of their way. I don't remember them ever expressing vitriol or hatred or wanting bad things to happen to the Black community, but they very specifically did not believe that white and Black people should mix. Now, they were old school. My grandparents were born in the teens. I think my grandfather was born in 1915. My grandmother was born the year after 1916. So to give you an idea of their generation and where they came from. So they were uneducated. They didn't interact or assimilate with Black culture. They had no idea. So, of course, and you know where this is going, the N-word. The N-word was just a word that was used. It was just used. And, because profanity wasn't allowed in my grandparents' home, why would I think it was such a harmful word? Now, keep in mind, I went to public school, and I went to a rural public school. And this is an absolute true story. I rode the bus to school, and the school that I went to was so small, and we had kindergarten through 12th grade. Now, in the bus, of course, the little kids sat right behind the bus driver, and then as you graduated up through the years, you got to inch closer to the back of the bus, right? And so all of the cool kids sat in the back of the bus. So obviously, when in social studies, I think I was in 4th grade, we were talking about Rosa Parks, and it was never explained in enough detail to me to the point where I graduated high school not really fully appreciating the civil rights movement as it was, simply because in my mind, why didn't she want to sit in the back of the bus? Because that's where the cool kids sat. Like literally, my public school education, That's what I gleaned from that. As a white kid, did not understand who Rosa Parks was, did not understand the value of her quiet act of peaceful defiance to the laws of segregation at that time. I didn't learn anything about them. Did not. And of course, it shouldn't surprise you that in elementary school, there were no black kids until I went to the larger school in 5th grade when I had classmates that were black. I'm still friends to this day with many of them. A lot of them still live in the same community. I didn't have a whole lot of, and I'm not making excuses. I'm merely stating a fact. But at no point in time did I ever have any vitriol or resentment or any type of feeling that I was any better than anybody. In fact, I was very close to our class president. He and I were pretty close our senior year of high school, to the point where, we were taking pictures, and I had taken a photograph of me and him and another classmate, and I put it in a frame. And after high school, I moved in with my grandmother, and I had that photograph on my dresser in my room, and my aunt saw it. And she said, "You need to take that off your dresser." I said, "Why?" I literally had no idea why she had a problem with it. She goes, "You know why." It didn't dawn on me. I literally did not understand it. And I think that my naivete, was working towards my betterment, because it didn't make sense to me. And I was I really was a stubborn kid. I did my own thing. If it doesn't make sense to me, I'm not going to lean into it. So of course I left my picture up. But, in my almost 49 years on this earth, and I look back on all of these occurrences, and it just blows my mind. It really blows my mind when I sit and contemplate what do black people have to deal with. Like, what is it like to live in America and to know that a significant portion of society really does not like you because of the color of your skin? Now, I could say that I know what it feels like, as a woman, to be treated with sexism, but I can't say that I genuinely know what it feels like to be discriminated against because of my race. I lived in Hawaii for a couple of years, and I got treated differently because I was white, but I don't think that even comes close to the experience of the African American. And it just makes me take a moment to consider, what is that like? And then to lean back on my own behaviors. Like, have I engaged in microaggressions based upon my own ignorance? I think that's possible. I'm sure it's possible. I'm sure that I have behaved in ways that have created a level of irritation, frustration, discontent by saying something stupid, or maybe saying something that was insulting to someone's intelligence. When I was in grad school, we were talking about we were talking about culture and the difference on different parts of culture around the world, and how different cultures interpret mental health conditions, because obviously I was going to school to become a therapist, social worker. I remember we were discussing African tribal traditions and their attitudes towards sex and gender, and how when in a lot of African tribe, they have the woman will dance for her future partner, do like a dance, When we were in school and we were talking about African traditions, and we were talking about how the mindset of female sexuality is vastly different in African culture than it is in puritanical culture, which is the culture of the United States and Western Europe. The puritanical idea based of Christian chastity, right? So in the Puritan mindset, you take the WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant mindset of sexuality, is that sex is considered shameful, especially for a woman to express her own sexuality. And it still is to this day in white communities. Now, take that cultural mindset and compare it to African culture that is vastly different, because it holds space and very high regard for feminine sexuality, which is embraced particularly when a young woman becomes old enough to enter into marriage. And because sexuality becomes a part of the marriage tradition, I'm generalizing, of course, but the dancing and the gyrating is a part of African culture because it embraces the woman's femininity and her power and her sexuality. So obviously all of that tradition, the African culture, is exhibited when you see the HBCUs, the historical Black colleges and universities. So when you look at their bands and you see the dancing teams and how they dance and gyrate and how they, use their hips and, even twerking. Twerking is a derivative of African culture. And, but when you take Puritan culture and you look at that, you see how there is that contrast, and you see how there's the, looking down in judgment. I think a lot of people, mostly white people, obviously, don't understand that just because somebody else does something differently does not make it incorrect. I think that the dancing and the meaningful movements that come with those tribal traditions that are intended to be taught from generation to generation to generation they're beautiful. And I think that they should be taught more in our schools. And we should express a desire to understand these communities of people that were ripped away from their culture hundreds of years ago and enslaved and brought to this country to toil and to be killed and murdered and treated like livestock. And they were the ones that brought up our country from the ground up. There's no question about that. There's no question that Black people have built this country. No question. And Black people continue to build this country. Black people absolutely deserve nothing less than our full, unadulterated respect. And they're owed a lot. And I just, I want to remove the vitriol. I want to remove the bitterness. I want to encourage people who might be listening to this, who might be feeling some type of way, to understand, check inside of yourself to see if maybe your behavior, and I'm speaking to my white people here, check to see if there's something about you that, you can readjust when it comes to how you move and how you engage our Black brothers and sisters. How can you do better? How can you, accept accountability for past grievances? I don't know what if you've, expressed racist comments, remarks, or actions, but it's based in ignorance, people. It really is. And I know that, thinking back when I was 9 years old at the city pool, and, I didn't know the N-word was that big of a deal. I didn't think it was that big of a deal. My grandparents used it. I mean, come on, it couldn't have been that bad. I mean, if my grandfather used it before church, it couldn't have been that bad, right? Right? It's not that harmful, and playing around at the city pool after I'd gone to, switch schools and playing with these Black kids at the pool, and, we're splashing each other, and I was ready for him to stop splashing me, and I called him an N-word. And then he got really, really angry. And then, of course, I was confused. I didn't know why he was blowing up at me and chasing me and trying to, dunk me in the water. And I got scared, and I thought I was the victim, And then years later, I carried a lot of shame because I knew I was in the wrong. And I knew I was the one that hurt him. I hurt him deeply. I'm sure I did. And then I think about the people who do that intentionally, who derive a sense of power by hurting somebody, by using a word that carries generations of pain within it. And that if you're going to express any level of respect, you don't utter it. It's not for you to utter. It's not for you to use. Ever. Ever. It's not for you to use. And, I think about that. I share that because that is my honest truth. That is the way, no, I didn't do it on purpose, but I'm still accountable, right? I'm still accountable for the hurt that I caused, even if I was 9 years old. And then I'm sure years later, I've done or said things that were, in alignment with things that I may have heard as a white person, and things I might have said or judgments or assumptions, right? I just think we can do better. I think we, as white people, owe the Black community a huge apology and change behavior. I definitely think our schools can do a better job. 100% we can do a better job. Hell, I didn't even know about the Freedom Riders until I was in my bachelor's program. It was never uttered in school, to my knowledge. To my knowledge, it wasn't. Didn't know anything about them. Not one utterance in my school education. We definitely can do better. I know I'm all over the place on this episode. It was just something that I wanted to talk about. I can't even begin to wrap my brain around the depth of injury. And then the thing is that it boggles my mind that with all of that pain, with all of that generational trauma that Black people have experienced from generation to generation to generation, for me to go to basic training, take my white country ass to the Air Force with my long hair and clumsy fingers and not know how to French braid and get yelled at by my training instructor because my hair was not within regulation. And for me to be under so much anxiety that I was in tears going back to the dormitory after training one day, that I was encircled by 3 Black women that looked at me and they giggled. They're like, "We're going to hook you up, girl. We're going to hook you up." And they saw my tears. They're like, "We got you." And they get behind me, and let me tell you what, they pulled my hair, and they got my hair tight, and they put in Let's Jam hair gel. If you know, you know. And my hair, it felt like it stayed wet for 3 days. And man, my hair was braided in a French braid for 3 days until I had to take it down. I had to wash my hair. And then finally, by then, I just decided to cut it off because it was just too much of a pain. But I'll never forget that. How the hell can a group of people just collectively who have been traumatized, generation after generation, with racism and maltreatment, look at me and show love and kindness and compassion? We can learn. We should learn. We need to pay attention. We need to look around and recognize. I'm at a loss when I think about it. It's 2022, and I'll scroll through TikTok or whatever, and people will have their videos up where they have recorded themselves being pulled over. I have people in my life that I love very much, that I care about very much, and it's just one of those things that it drives a spike through my heart to see them hurt and see them mistreated. I don't want to see anybody that I care about, love, and respect mistreated. Oh, Lord, the Supreme Court and all the folly and all of the deliriously, ridiculously horrible decisions that have been made and that they're attempting to make with regard to same-sex and interracial marriage. Can't we just let people love? Can't we just leave shit alone? Can't we just let adults be adults? We've got other things we can worry about. We got other things that we can focus our attention on. But I will say this in closing. This is a long one. I think that the government can control us when we don't like each other and when we are at odds with each other and when we have racial tension and when we are divided. And I think that that's the purpose behind it. And it's just easier to control people when we are in small subset groups and when we have a distrust of one another. And I think that it's important that we learn to trust each other. And I think it's important that we learn to respect one another. That's how I feel about that. All right, from fear to love. This has been an LBM production. Please like, subscribe, and share this show. Thanks for listening.